LeighTDickey.com. What is going on, everybody? Leigh Dickey here. Welcome to another episode. Welcome to a new episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast, a special bonus show because this will probably come out sometime Wednesday afternoon or Thursday morning. So it will be a special bonus show right here on the Beats and Speaks podcast. And today I want to give you a behind-the-scenes look at my interview with Sam Ince. Now, that interview was released this past Friday, November 8th, on the Beats and Speaks podcast. And I felt it only fitting that I give you guys a bonus show on the behind-the-scenes tidbits of this interview because they are interesting and they are aplenty. But before we get into the main event and the behind-the-scenes look at my interview with Sam Ince right here on the Beats and Speaks podcast, I want to tell you, A, where you can find the Beats and Speaks podcast, B, how you can become a future guest right here on the Beats and Speaks podcast, and I want to tell you a bit about Sam Ince himself since he is the subject of my last two episodes. The interview went up on November 8th, and here I am today telling you about the behind-the-scenes tidbits of that interview. So first, you can find the Beats and Speaks podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, and your favorite podcast app and player of choice. New episodes are released every Friday at midnight Eastern Time. We're also on YouTube, so subscribe to us there as well by searching for Leigh Dickey TV. But of course, all those links will be in the description below. You can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Leigh T. Dickey, and that is LEIGHTDICKEY. Of course, you can find the episodes of the Beats and Speaks podcast on my official website, LeighTDickey.com as well. Please comment, like, share, subscribe, and leave us reviews. Leave reviews on iTunes and your favorite podcast app and player of choice. You can leave reviews on my official website by going to the Beats and Speaks podcast landing page, which will be linked in the description below, and you can leave reviews underneath your favorite episode of choice because they are available there now. And you can also leave reviews on my official Facebook page, which is facebook.com/LeighTDickey, and I will read them out right here on the Beats and Speaks podcast, as well as feature them on my official website, LeighTDickey.com. All right, now that all that housekeeping is out of the way, and don't forget that new episodes of the Beats and Speaks podcast are released every Friday at midnight Eastern Time on your favorite podcast app and player of choice, as well as my official website, LeighTDickey.com. All right, seriously, now that all that housekeeping is out of the way, at least for me, I want to tell you a bit about my guest from this past week and the subject of this behind-the-scenes episode, Sam Ince of the Beta Network podcast. Sam, like I said, is a co-host and founder of the Beta Network podcast, which is an Australian-based podcast which focuses around video games and movies. It's a fantastic show. I've listened to a few episodes. They're great guys. It's a roundtable discussion, and it's just movies and video games, and they're just awesome folks. And it was great to have Sam on the show. So check out the Beta Network podcast on your favorite podcast app and player of choice. But of course, I will link as many links as I can find of the Beta Network podcast, and you can follow Sam Ince as well. I will post all those links in the description below. Go find the Beta Network podcast. Go find the Beats and Speaks podcast. Listen to both shows. Listen to my interview with Sam. But let's get into the main event. Why you guys are really here. The behind-the-scenes look at my interview with Sam Ince of the Beta Network podcast right here, right now on a brand new bonus show on the Beats and Speaks podcast. Here we go. All right, so my interview with Sam Ince. In terms of how that came together, as you guys know, if you've listened to this show, I have been releasing episodes of a Star Wars miniseries within this podcast, the Beats and Speaks podcast, and Sam was and is one of the interviews that was released. His interview was the latest interview within the series, which was released on November 8th. And it was great to have Sam on. He was one of the guests that I was really looking forward to having on this show. When I put out that casting call in terms of looking for guests for the Star Wars miniseries, he was one of the first people to email me because that's how I said, this is how you're going to get a hold of me. Send me an email to leightdickey@gmail.com, and that's how you all can get a hold of me as well if you wish. He was one of the first guests, and we had to figure out a time to record. And I don't know whether I asked him where he was from or he just freely offered it up. I said, well, what time zone? I think I asked, what time zone are you in? He's like, well, I'm in Melbourne, Australia. And I was like, ooh, wow, okay. That kind of came to me as a bit of a shock because I didn't think, I would get a guest from that far, from that part of the world. And I said, you know what? This could be really fun because I don't know what, Star Wars was like for them as opposed to what it was like for people like myself in North America. Now, for those of you that are curious, not that I haven't mentioned this before, but this show is produced out of Toronto, Canada, and that's where I live. Obviously, like I said, Sam's in Melbourne, Australia, so I figured getting someone else's perspective other than that of someone from North America would be awesome. So yes, I wanted him on the show, but it was just kind of like, okay, so how are we going to figure this out? Now, he was one of my first interviews ever. Like when I started interviewing people for the Beats and Speaks podcast, I had only used the Zoom web video conference client meeting software. I didn't realize that Skype had its own onboard recorder. At that point, I hadn't found out about it, and I was still using Zoom. So Sam and I went back and forth. We set up a day to record because I got so many emails from people that wanted to be a guest within the Star Wars miniseries. I had to stop it after a little while because I got so many emails and said, listen, I have to cap this or I'm going to talk about nothing but Star Wars for weeks and months and years to come. And I really didn't want to do that. The Beats and Speaks podcast is a general interest, lifestyle, everyday life, everyday stories, everyday people, comedy and entertainment audio joyride. So we'll mix the Star Wars in with everything else. So I didn't want to have about 75 interviews on this show just about Star Wars. So I had to put a cap on the casting call. I think I'd settled on 8 or 9 people, maybe 10. I think we got up to, I did get up to double digits, maybe not, somewhere close to that. Sam was one of the ones that I really wanted to have on. I was really looking forward to his interview. Not that I'm not looking forward to every interview that I have on this show, but when it comes to interviewing someone like Sam about one of his favorite subjects, obviously, which is Star Wars, and I've said this several times, whether I'm a guest on someone's show or on this show, I'm not a big fan of Star Wars. I never have been, but it's always cool to talk to people who are fans and find out why they're fans and what they love about the franchise and possibly what they don't love about the franchise. And to get Sam's perspective was awesome because, like I said, he's from Melbourne, Australia, and I am from Toronto, Canada. So I don't know whether or not the release of the films or the cut of the films or even like the merchandise differs at all as opposed to what we get here in North America. So to have him on, it was great. When it came to setting up the interview was fine. And, he's a trooper for sort of sitting through the technical difficulties, and I'll get to those in a second, because the same thing that I mentioned in my behind-the-scenes episode with Kat Carter, which is in the archives, you can go find that episode on my official website, leightdickey.com, and your favorite podcast app and player of choice. Same issues that happened in her episode happened in Sam's episode, and I figure, okay, I don't know whether it has to do with my Wi-Fi connection or what, but setting up the interview with Sam was fine. We had set it up. The technical issues aside, the interview went off so well. Sam is one of my favorite guests. He's one of my favorite people to go back and forth with. And with all of my guests that I have on this show, there's always spots available for the guests that I have had on this show. If they want to come back, there's always spots for people that want to tell their stories on this show. So just get in touch with me at leightdickey@gmail.com, and we can set something up and go from there. So setting up the interview with Sam, in terms of like the administrative stuff, like the emails and setting up a time and going back and forth, that was simple. That was fine. The execution of the interview was a little more difficult. Now, like I said, same issues that came up in Kat Carter's interview also came up in Sam's interview, and that was the fact that my Wi-Fi just would not hold. The connection kept dropping. Whether I was sitting closer to my router or sitting right here at my dining table like I am now. The only issue with the only difference, I should say, is the fact that I'm recording a solo show, the behind-the-scenes episode for you right now, and when I was talking to both Kat Carter and with Sam Ince in their respective episodes, you have two feeds. You've got mine going out to them, and you've got theirs coming back to me, and that's just sort of all getting married and mixed together into one single audio file that is then turned into an episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast for you all to enjoy. So I don't know whether or not it was the fact that I have two feeds going or the fact that my Wi-Fi really isn't the best that it could be, but it is what it is. And when Sam and I were doing the interview, we had it slated for 10 a.m. Eastern Time on October 3rd here in Toronto, or at least here in North America in the Eastern Time Zone. For Sam, that was midnight on October 4th the next day, because Australia is 14 hours ahead of where I am in Toronto. Now, I figured, with Sam staying up there, I was like, are you sure you're up for that, right? I mean, yes, I like to record my interviews during the day because that's when I have the most time. I, work out of my home and I work fairly local. So I have the luxury. I work for myself and I can basically work from wherever I want and work my own hours. But with Sam, I was just kind of like, are you sure that's okay? Because after figuring out the time difference was like 14 hours and the fact that he was living in the future and there was no possible way that I could get up to 88 miles an hour and somehow make it earlier for him, because that's just not how clocks work. I was just, are you sure that's okay? Because I realized what time it was for him, and I felt bad because he'd agreed to meet me at my time, which was 10 a.m. Eastern Time on the 3rd for me, which was fine because at that point I've had a cup of coffee, I'm ready to go, I've set everything up, and everything was fine, right, for me. But it's, midnight. It's late for him, and I felt bad on that. In that respect, I felt bad. But after the technical issues started happening, I felt really bad. Because what would happen, well, I don't know, again, like I said, I don't know whether it was the fact that my internet connection isn't, the best that it could be, or what I was using to record. Both the computers that I use to edit and record these interviews are fairly old. My main editing rig is about 9 years old. It's a 9-year-old HP laptop. And my secondary setup is a 7-year-old netbook. They're both fairly clunky to move around. Now, granted, I have come up with a solution to both of those problems, so I don't ever have to use my computer to record interviews again, which is nice, and I'll get into that later on in this episode. I'll tell you what the solution is as we get towards the end, or even in the middle. Sometime in this episode, I'll tell you what the solution was that I figured out. But I felt bad for Sam because I had technical issues on my end. I had set everything up. And when it comes to just going through interviews with anybody, of course, I understand that, people have lives. They'd like to get sleep, or they'd like to continue on with their day. So when I have a technical issue, like, my Wi-Fi connection continually dropping in the middle of an interview, so we'd have to start again, and then I think it dropped out about 4 times within a matter of an hour, but we finally managed to get about a half an hour's worth of audio out. It decided to finally play along. But again, I Sam, if you're listening to this behind the scenes episode, I apologize profusely, my friend, and thank you for sticking with me through all the technical issues. You're a trooper. You're an absolute gent. And again, if you ever want to come back, or even if any of your co-hosts want to do an episode from the Beta Network podcast, if they ever want to come on the Beats and Speaks podcast, the door is open for all of you to come on. Sam, there's always a spot for you here, and there's a spot for your co-host. And if anybody else has a story to tell, there's a spot open for anybody, because I am down to hear your stories. I am down to get to know you. I am down to just help you tell your stories. I'm down for just good old-fashioned conversation. But Sam, again, I thank you for coming on the show, and I'm sorry for all the technical issues, because my internet connection that day was not playing along. It just, I don't know whether it's just somebody trying to poke at me, thinking, like, what makes you think you can handle this interview with this guy from Australia? Like, what are you doing? Maybe that's just, I don't know, I don't want to call it like divine intervention, or like, somebody upstairs just trying to poke at me a little bit, but it's what it felt like a little. Kind of just, what are you doing, kid? You interviewing this guy from Australia? What makes you think that you have the right to do that? And I'm just happy that, Sam stuck with me, stuck through it, through all the technical issues, and I'm just happy that I found a solution to the problem. Granted, like, I've had a few snafus. I've had more than one snafu with using, a laptop to record my interviews. So Sam wasn't the only one. Kat Carter wasn't the only one. I've had more than one technical issue with using a laptop to record an interview for the Beats and Speaks podcast, and I've found a solution. But again, I'm happy that Sam stuck with me through all the technical issues, because by the time we got our interview actually recorded, by the time we let each other go, it was probably about just after 11 o'clock Eastern time on the 3rd for me, which would have put him at about 1 a.m. in Melbourne, which I felt really bad, because most of my interviews sit somewhere between 20 and 40, 45 minutes. When everything plays along, I can get everything done within 25 to say 50 minutes. Like, you're just under an hour with me. Or say it's somewhere, it might even be less than that, but it's somewhere between, usually from start to finish, I can get everything done in a window of about 25 to 50 minutes, depending on how long the interview goes, and depending on A, how much fun we're having, B, the types of interviews and stories that I get. When I have technical issues, the interviews could stretch from their original scheduled time. They could last, again, I've had technical issues where I've had to interview somebody for 2 straight hours just to get decent recordings, and even then, we had to reschedule for later in that same day, and I'm glad that we got that interview taken care of and executed rightly and correctly. With Sam's, I'm glad that my Wi-Fi decided to play along after not playing along and kind of messing with me for an extra hour. And I'm thankful that Sam, he reached out and wanted to come on the show. I'm thankful to have him on the show. I'm thankful that he was patient enough with me through all the technical issues. Yeah, I'm thankful that my Wi-Fi decided it was going to play along, and it decided to like me eventually. So, I mean, that's pretty much the gist of the behind the scenes of my interview with Sam Ince of the Beta Network podcast on his episode, which was episode 4 within the Star Wars miniseries, which is right here on the Beats and Speaks podcast. And you can listen to that interview. It is in the archives on my official website, LeighTDickey.com, and your favorite podcast app and player of choice, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, you name it. Wherever you can find the Beats and Speaks podcast, and wherever you do find podcasts, we're on that app. Now, I promised that I'd tell you about the solution I found where I wouldn't have to use a computer anymore, and that is I picked up an external recorder. Now, I'm not using that external recorder right now to record this episode, but when it comes to using an external recorder for my interviews, I found that they work wonders. It works great. It's fantastic. I picked up the Olympus, I think it's the WS-852. I did use that on a future interview, on a future episode, which you will hear in a few weeks here on the Beats and Speaks podcast. And it worked great. The external mics, they're great. For the price that I paid, I think I paid about 58 Canadian. And I also picked up the TP8 microphone, which is a microphone that sits, it's a pickup mic that sits in your ear. And if you hold your, say, phone up and you use Skype, Zoom, WhatsApp, or like just make a regular phone call, you'll be fine. You'll be great. You'll be golden, right? Because it works wonders. It picks up both sides of the conversation, picks up what you're saying, it picks up what your interviewee is saying, and then you have a file right there without having to use a computer and have to worry about like a software crash and things just not working. And that is the solution that I found, and it's the solution that has worked thus far, even though I've only had, as of recording this episode, one interview with it. But I will more than likely have more interviews and use that as my preferred setup, rather than having to use either a 7-year-old netbook or my 9-year-old laptop, because they're basically grandpas of technology, and they're the only things that I would use my main rig for now mainly is editing the audio, because it's just easier for me to edit the audio there. The last couple interviews that I had using Skype with either of those laptops, I had to get my guests to record the call through Skype, and I don't want to have to do that with them, because that doesn't look good on me. It causes extra work for them, and I don't want to have them have to work extra hard when it was me that wanted to have them on this show, or whether or not they wanted to come on this show. It's just not fair to them, and I want to make this experience as easy for me as I do for them, because they're my guest. This is via a Wi-Fi connection. It's basically my house, and I want to make them feel welcome. I want to make them feel comfortable, and if they have to do the work that I should be able to do, then we're going to have all sorts of issues, and I'm probably never going to have people on this show ever again. So that's why I picked up that external recorder, the Olympus WS-852 with the TP8 pickup microphone, and it has worked wonderfully. I've tested it out several times, and with my first interview that I used it with to record, it was great. I got a fantastic interview, picked up both sides of the conversation, and I couldn't have been happier with it. So that is the solution that I came up with. Now, yeah, like when it came down to price, like the recorder itself, like I said, was like 58 Canadian. The microphone sold separately was about another $25. So you're looking at about 84 bucks roughly, plus tax, but it wasn't that much. So, you're looking at less than $90 for that setup, and it works great. It worked with my phone, which is actually what I'm using to record this solo show on. I'm actually using a headset with a 3.5 millimeter jack going into my smartphone, which is an LG Q6, pardon me. I also bought this headset in that same package with the Olympus recorder and the pickup microphone, even though I bought this separately. So that's the little package was like, I don't know, $95, $96, which for $100 and 3 solid pieces of recording gear, so I can record interviews. And if I ever wanted to do a solo show away from my desk, which is something that I'm known for and things that I like to do, because I do not like sitting at a desk, for 3 pieces, including this headset, this Logitech headset with a microphone, and the TP8 pickup microphone and the Olympus recorder for $95, $96. You can't really go wrong. But that is the behind the scenes of my interview with Sam Ince right here on the Beats and Speaks podcast. Of course, you can go listen to the interview in the archives on my official website, LeighTDickey.com, and on your favorite podcast app and player of choice. Like I said at the beginning, please comment, like, share, and subscribe. Find the Beats and Speaks podcast on my official website, LeighTDickey.com, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and wherever you get your favorite podcasts. We're also on YouTube by searching for Leigh Dickey TV. Of course, all those links will be below. You can follow me on social media at LeighTDickey. You can leave reviews on my official Facebook page, which is facebook.com/LeighTDickey. And you can also leave reviews on the Beats and Speaks podcast landing page, which of course will be linked in the description below under your favorite episode of choice, because why not? And I will feature them right here on the Beats and Speaks podcast, as well as on my official website, LeighTDickey.com. If you'd like to be a guest on a future episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast, please do email me at LeighTDickey@gmail.com. Now, to find my guest and the subject of this behind-the-scenes episode, Sam Ince of the Beta Network podcast, I will post those links below. You can follow him on Twitter at Sam Ince. You can follow the Beta Network on Twitter as well at The Network Beta. And you can subscribe to the Beta Network on YouTube. You can also find them on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and wherever you get your favorite podcast. But now that you know where to find me, Leigh T. Dickey, and where to find my guest, Sam Ince, and his podcast, the Beta Network podcast, I bid you adieu for now. For this episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast, please comment, like, share, and subscribe. And remember that new episodes of the Beats and Speaks podcast go live every single Friday at midnight Eastern Time on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, your favorite podcast app and player of choice, as well as my YouTube channel, which is Leigh Dickey TV, of course. And again, if you want to be a future guest on an episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast, just email me at LeighTDickey@gmail.com, and we can set something up and go from there, so you and I can have a good old-fashioned conversation, and you can find yourself and listen to yourself and hear yourself right here on a future episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. Everybody's got a story. I just help them tell it. So if you got a story and you want to have a conversation, get in touch with me, and we can have you right here on a future episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. But this wraps up another episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. Of course, I am your host, Leigh Dickey. It's been fun. Thanks for listening. Again, please comment, like, share, and subscribe on your favorite podcast app and player of choice, as well as go to my official website, LeighTDickey.com. Again, we're on YouTube, so search for Leigh Dickey TV as well. All those links will be in the description. You can follow me on social media at Leigh T. Dickey on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Links again are in the description. Follow Sam Ince and the Beta Network podcast. I will leave as many links as I can find in the description. But like I said, this has been another episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. I have been your host, Leigh Dickey. And until Friday at midnight Eastern Time, next Friday at midnight Eastern Time, I bid you adieu. So this is Leigh Dickey for the Beats and Speaks podcast, signing off. Have a great one. We'll talk to you soon. Peace. Leigh T. Dickey.